Hi, today we're going to be talking about long run and short run macroeconomic equilibrium. So we're going to start with this graph. And you should notice right off the bat something new, and it's this vertical line. So the vertical line represents long run aggregate supply, which is going to be differentiated from short run aggregate supply. And what mainly differentiates it, not so much a time period, but that in the long run, everything is changeable. Whereas in the short run, there is at least one thing that is fixed, and it is typically capital expenses. So, for example, if you run, like, let's say you have a Subway shop, and in the short run, business is bad, so you can lay people off. So that means that your labor costs are flexible, but you still will have to continue to pay your rent. So that would mean that your capital expense is not flexible or not changeable. But in the long run, once your rent is over, say you signed a 1-year lease, after that lease is over, then everything is renegotiable. So that's the difference between the short run and the long run. In the short run, at least one input factor is fixed. In the long run, nothing is fixed. So that is why prices do not affect the long run. So, what does affect the long run? What could make the long run aggregate supply move to the right, which would mean we have an increase in the quantity of real GDP, or to the left, which would mean that we would have a decrease in the quantity of real GDP? So, wherever the long run aggregate supply hits this axis, that is called QN, the natural rate of quantity, or full employment level, or potential real GDP. So those terms can be used interchangeably. So when we say potential real GDP, that means that at this point, that is where all of our resources are used well and wisely. So full employment does not necessarily only mean labor. It means full employment of all of our resources. So that would mean that when you drive by a strip center, you're not going to be seeing empty shops. You're not going to be seeing a bunch of for lease signs. Everything will be full. Everything will be used. Unemployment will be low. We know unemployment will not be zero because we know that there's always there's at the natural rate of unemployment that's around 4 to 5%. There's always some level. But here at QN, we're doing the best that we can. All right. So if price here does not change the long run aggregate supply, what does? Well, we're going to say it's real factors: productivity of workers, changes in resources or capital stock, or a change in technology. So it can be any one or any combination of these things will lead to an increase in potential real GDP, and the long run aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. Now, these things could also happen in a negative way. We could have a negative change in resources or capital stock. Our productivity of workers could go down. We could lose patents or something like that, and our change in technology could go down. And that would lead to a leftward shift of the long run aggregate supply curve. So now we're going to talk about macro equilibrium. So short run versus long run. If we're talking about short run equilibrium, that will be where aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply intersect. But long run will be where all three curves, short run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, and long run aggregate supply. It is possible to be at short run equilibrium at output levels either above or below our potential real GDP. But if real GDP, what's really happening today, equals our potential real GDP, then the economy will be at long run equilibrium. And we say that the economy gravitates toward equilibrium at the potential rate of real GDP. So let's look at this graph and just